everyone, and welcome back to another enriching session of the Canadian SME Small Business Podcast. I'm your host, Maheen, to guide you through the fascinating world of entrepreneurship and innovation. Today, we're set to explore digital strategies, public-private sector synergies, and the cutting-edge world of artificial intelligence. Joining us today is Ryan Androsoff, an expert in digital government and founder and CEO of Think Digital. Ryan has an impressive track record from co-founding the Canadian Digital Service to advising on digital strategies globally. His work bridges the gap between technology and effective government, making him a pivotal figure in driving public sector innovation. Today, Ryan brings his insights directly to us, sharing his expertise on how digital tools and methodologies can really transform public interactions and services. Hi, Ryan. Good afternoon. Welcome to the Canadian SME Small Business Podcast. How are you today?
Thanks so much, Maheen. Really great to be here with you in studio.
We're very eager to hear from your vast experience in digital transformation. Ryan, we're pleased to have you with us here, and we're all very eager to learn more about your experiences in the digital transformation sector. Now, to begin things with, Ryan, your career has seamlessly blended technology with public service, like addressing some of today's most pressing challenges. Could you share what inspired you to leave the stable government job and start Think Digital?
Yeah, thanks so much for the question. And, it's interesting. I mean, when I look back at my career path, it's taken directions that probably I wouldn't have predicted, 25 or 30 years ago. Even though most of my career actually was in the public sector, I always viewed myself as being an entrepreneur and kind of a public sector entrepreneur, if you can put it that way. In my early career, in my 20s, I actually worked in politics, and I worked on Parliament Hill and worked for candidates back home in Saskatchewan. And it's interesting, working on a political campaign or an election campaign is actually a lot like getting a startup going. A lot of kind of similar patterns to that. And then in 2010, I had the opportunity to go into government and bring together some passions of mine, which were digital transformation and thinking about how we can make government more effective, and spent 7 or 8 years inside the federal government here in Canada. And a lot of the roles, I was doing inside of the public service were still actually quite entrepreneurial in nature. It included, we set up one of the first wikis and social networks for the government of Canada inside, with very interesting kind of pilot in the early days of social media, trying to see how we could get public servants to collaborate better together. And then one of the final projects I did before I left government was helping to co-found the Canadian Digital Service, which is a special purpose team in government to bring tech talent and policy experts together to advance how government is doing digital service delivery. And so, I even though I was in government, I was doing some interesting entrepreneurial type of work, but I always had thought that I may want to pivot out and be able to continue this work from that outside perspective. And so made that decision about 7 years ago now to leave the public service and still very much kind of continue the work on digital transformation, on supporting public sector entities, on modernizing, but being able to do that from the outside as, a trusted advisor and as a trainer rather than doing it from the inside. So it's been a really interesting journey and very much kind of enjoying that transition.
Now, Ryan, every entrepreneur, they have they go through their own unique set of challenges. What were the initial challenges that you faced when you made that transition from the government role to starting, Think Digital?
And I think similar to a lot of people in the entrepreneurial and startup space, and certainly colleagues that I work with, there is, it's obviously kind of that initial bit where you're trying to get your first clients, you're trying to find if you've got the right market fit. But then very quickly, there's a bit of an issue of scale and sustainability that you have to think through. When I first left government, I was essentially a solopreneur. I was doing kind of individual consulting. I had partnered with the Institute on Governance, which is a nonprofit in Ottawa that does training for public service executives. And we had developed a digital leadership course. But after a few years, made the decision to set up Think Digital, which is my company, that brings together a network of associates who can bring this multidisciplinary approach to projects. So it's been great to have this expanded network, but of course, the bigger you get, the more complex it gets. And for somebody who's, in charge of day-to-day management of that, there's a lot more of kind of, keeping the trains running on time that you end up being focused on. And I think one of the challenges for me as somebody who cares very passionately about the subject matter of the work we're doing, I still very very much like being involved kind of in the projects, in delivering some of the training we're doing directly. And so it's finding that right balance of, do you want to stay boutique and kind of really focused on a small niche, or do you want to scale? And if you're going to scale, there's some implications that come along with that.
Right. That's great. I mean, your journey is quite a testament to the impact one can make when they step out of their comfort zone and they embrace entrepreneurship. Now, Ryan, let's discuss the public sector digital transformation because I know that you touched slightly on it, but we would love to dive deeper into this topic. Now, transforming digital infrastructure within the public sector is a monumental task. What do you see it as the biggest hurdles when helping public organizations modernize digitally?
It's an interesting question. And I think, we see the headlines in the news. We know that governments, not just here in Canada, around the world, are struggling to be able to keep pace in many cases. And I think one of the most, I would say, interesting insights from my perspective is that it's not so much about the technology. Getting people up to speed with new technology is part of it, but it's actually a culture change challenge at its core. And even beyond that, we face this kind of fundamental problem that our government and a lot of our public sector institutions are 20th century, 19th century, 18th century institutions that are trying to adapt to a world of 21st century technology and all the possibilities and challenges that comes along with it. I often talk about the old management consulting adage that culture eats strategy for breakfast. And that's 100% true. You can have the greatest digital strategy for your organization, but if you don't have a culture that supports it, it's not going to get you very far. But I always add two other layers onto that, which is I think incentives eat culture and structures eat everything else. And what I mean by that is, the incentives in the organization are actually what shapes the culture. What gets people promoted, what gets them disciplined, what's in their performance agreements. And the structures, the ways decisions are made, the ways that budgets are allocated, ultimately is going to kind of shape your ability to adapt. And so the problem, I think, has been for a lot of public sector organizations, their focus has very much been on strategy, but they haven't actually changed the way that they're operating at that deep level. And so that's actually a lot of the work we do is to try work with government organizations to get them thinking about some of those structural and incentive and cultural components. Because I think if that part gets done, it actually opens up the possibility for that kind of deeper digital transformation to their work.
You're right. I mean, it's quite clear that the challenges are significant, but the benefits of digital modernization are transformative. Reflecting on our conversation with Ryan about digital transformation, it's quite clear that embracing new technologies isn't just about upgrading systems, it's really about rethinking how we can serve our communities more effectively. How does your business integrate into technologies to enhance service delivery or customer interaction? Share your stories or questions and let's explore together how digital tools can elevate your business operations. And that leads us to our other topic, which is bridging sectors, right?
Yes.
I mean, misunderstandings between the public and the private sectors can lead to, inefficiencies and missed opportunities. Ryan, how does Think Digital help bridge the understanding between these two worlds?
Yeah, it's really, I think, interesting in the work that we're doing, now doing this from a private sector perspective, being a private company, but working exclusively with government and kind of a public benefit type of approach. I find a lot of the work we do actually is almost a bit of a translation function, right? What we're trying to do is, in our team, we have people who understand technology trends. They understand what's happening in the private sector and in the market, but they also deeply understand government and they understand the kind of constraints and the environment that the public sector has to work within. And I think being able to communicate and bringing those two sides together is a really important function. But sometimes it doesn't happen very effectively. And there's often kind of, I think, this divide that people can feel, particularly from the private sector where people feel like it's tough to actually engage with or work with government, or vice versa. I think on the government side, where people feel sometimes they don't have the digital literacy to be able to ask the right questions and actually know what they need to be able to kind of engage with from the private sector. So I actually find a lot of our work is trying to help people kind of bridge that gap and bring those two sides together.
Now, talking about bridging this gap and to build on this a bit more, what can be done to improve these interactions, particularly in the context of public procurement?
Yeah, I mean, procurement's a hot topic these days. Certainly we've seen a few scandals coming up around procurement. It's been discussed in Parliament quite a bit. And I think this is something that every level of government is facing. Because the reality is that when we're talking about technology modernization, on the one hand, I strongly believe government has to build up its own capacity. But government's never going to be able to do it alone. And it's always going to have to work with outside partners to be able to build, to be able to get that outside perspective, to be able to develop strategy. And so I think what becomes really important in that is for us to be thinking about how do we actually modernize procurement within the public sector to allow that? Because a lot of our procurement systems, and anybody listening to this who's done work with government will probably recognize this, it's very much set up in kind of an industrial era waterfall method of, setting out requirements, firing it off in an RFP, somebody builds it and sends it back over to them. And that works well if you're building a bridge, but it doesn't work so well if you're dealing in kind of the complex and changing world of software and digital tools, where you need a lot of back and forth, you need a lot of user interaction, you need to kind of understand and be able to pivot and be agile along the way. And so I think one of the big challenges that governments are starting to think about, but I think need a lot more progress on, is we talk a lot now about kind of agile development, about user-centered design, but our procurement systems and the way that we fund projects within the public sector haven't caught up to that. And so I think being able to think about what agile procurement could look like in government while still maintaining the public trust is really important. I will mention, in the recent budget from the federal government, there was actually a great little piece of good news in there for small and medium-sized companies in Canada, that the federal government is going to be putting in place targets for procurement specifically from small and medium-sized enterprise in Canada. And I think that's a great step forward, because I find, unfortunately, a lot of kind of local companies and local entrepreneurs here in Canada find it really difficult to sell to their own government. And hopefully this starts changing again some of those incentives and structures to open up procurement in a way that lets more Canadian companies be able to actually engage with government.
No, that's great news. And I feel like bridging these gaps between sectors, it not only improves efficiency, but it also fosters innovation between sectors too. We just heard about the critical role of fostering better understanding and collaboration between public and private sector. This synergy is not only crucial for smoother operations, but also for innovation. Do you have experiences or challenges in dealing with public sector projects? If yes, then let's discuss how these partnerships can be optimized for mutual benefit and greater impact on society. Thank you for tuning in to the Canadian SME Small Business Podcast. We're going to take a quick break to catch our breath, but stay with us, and we'll be right back with more insights and stories from the heart of small business.
You dreamt big. You made the leap. You and your "we're not stopping at small" business. Doesn't matter you've never done it before. You unlock those problems. You adapt to change. You learn to evolve. You're pioneers in challenging times, finding your own frontiers. Wherever you e-commerce, UPS is with you. So nothing is going to hold you back.
Nope.
Constant Contact delivers the marketing tools your small business needs to keep up, excel, and grow. Constant Contact, helping the small stand tall.
Welcome back to the Canadian SME Small Business Podcast. We hope you're as excited as we are going to dive back into today's topic. Let's continue our journey into the inspiring world of small business, full of innovation and passion. Talking about innovation, AI is becoming a cornerstone for both the business and the governance. And on that note, Ryan, what potential do you see for AI in enhancing public services?
Yeah, AI has been kind of top of the hype cycle for the last year or two, with tools like ChatGPT, I think, capturing the headlines. We're doing a lot of work talking with, a lot of government agencies, just trying to do education work around what does it mean? How do we sort out kind of reality from the hype and what can be real there? And I think often when people think about AI and government, they're thinking about public service delivery, having a chatbot that you can talk to, using AI to make decisions about benefits, for example. And there's possibilities of doing that. I think, to be honest with you, though, those are actually some of the riskier possibilities. I do think probably at some point we're going to get to a world where we probably have almost AI concierges that are going to help us navigate through multiple levels of government to be able to get services. That might be where we are 5 or 10 years from now. But where I actually think there's probably a lot more potential for governments to use AI in the short term and a little bit of a safer way as they experiment with it is, number one, for internal service delivery. Functions like HR, functions like trying to help teams be more productive internally. Governments have tons of data, tons of information. AI has real potential, I think, to be able to help to sort through that and derive insights from it. And then on kind of a personal use case, I think this is what's been fascinating about generative AI is it's not the multi-million-dollar big AI implementations, but it is, $20 a month to have ChatGPT on your phone, or it's, the Microsoft Copilot license that gets put into your productivity suite. And I actually think in the short term, that's where some really interesting kind of productivity gains might happen as individual public servants on a professional level start experimenting with how they can potentially augment their work by using AI and finding that right balance for how to be able to incorporate it but do it in an ethical way.
Talking about ethical ways, I mean, it's quite clear that AI has a lot to offer. It's got great potential, but it's also important to really carefully consider the ethical implications that are tied with it, right? Especially for navigating its use. Now, Ryan, I mean, what are some ethical considerations government should definitely keep in mind when using AI?
Yeah, we published a paper on this in the fall looking at kind of government use of AI and some of the risk considerations around it. And I think, number one, we talk a lot about bias in AI and the concerns around that. The algorithms behind AI, essentially can sometimes kind of automate the status quo. And if we know we have discrimination, if we know we have biased data, it can lead to biased results on the other side. So I think governments in particular that have a mission to be able to maintain public trust really have to be careful about making sure that they are not finding biased results, coming out of it on the other side. And I'll just say the trust piece. I think there's a lot of discussion as of late, too, as to how comfortable Canadians feel about the use of AI to make decisions. And I think this is going to be kind of a conversation that we're going to have together, because the ultimate reality is governments can only innovate at the speed of trust. And if they don't have public support for using technology, and we've seen some examples of that, where governments have kind of gotten ahead of where public opinion is on this, very quickly they can lose that social license to be able to take advantage of these new technologies. And so I think it actually is a good sign that a lot of governments are thinking carefully about how do we be able to take steps to use these tools that maintain ethical safeguards, that are thinking about kind of bias that could creep into it. And accuracy is another issue there as well, right? We kind of know this kind of phenomenon of hallucinations that happen with generative AI tools. And the advice we often give to people is, think about using some of these generative AI tools as being a really smart and efficient intern, not an all-knowing oracle. And kind of putting the same kind of rigor you would. I think it can help you with your productivity, but don't just take it as being, the answer. Make sure that you are bringing your own lens on that and making sure that that public interest is being represented with it.
Ryan's insights into AI's potential to transform public services are truly fascinating. It really prompts us to think about how AI is being utilized in our own sectors. What opportunities or challenges have you encountered in integrating AI into your business? Let's dive deeper into this topic and discuss practical ways AI can be leveraged for enhancing efficiency and decision-making in your operations. In this digital age, the literacy of leaders in technology is so crucial. It's more crucial now than ever.
Yes.
And on that point, Ryan, what strategies do you recommend for enhancing digital literacy among senior government officials?
Yeah, this is the topic near and dear to my heart. A lot of the work that we do at Think Digital actually is around working with executives in the public sector on helping to build up their digital literacy. We run a digital executive leadership program, which we've been running for 5 years, which essentially is kind of a week-long boot camp for government leaders to understand things like user research and agile methodology and data science and AI, really being able to kind of sort the hype out. I often say, my ambition for leaders in government is that they can ask better questions. Because the big change that's happened is, if you went back 10, 20 years ago, technology was kind of viewed as the CIO's job, it was taken care of in the back office. But the big shift that's happened is that now digital impacts everybody's job. And anything you're doing in government has part of that. So I think education is really important. We do a lot of training, capacity building around this. I think for anybody who, is a leader in public or private sector, I would suggest that you kind of have to make that a personal priority to stay on top of these trends, to find opportunities to learn about it. And I'll just say, one of the things that we also do to kind of help bring people along on that journey, we have a podcast that we run as well called Let's Think Digital, where we talk about issues at the intersection of technology and government and how technology is shaping government, and go into depth on issues like artificial intelligence and what it means for policymakers. So we'll certainly encourage anybody who's interested, Let's Think Digital.ca or on the podcast platforms, you can kind of dive into some of these topics in greater depth.
Mm-hmm. I think it's very essential. Empowering leaders through this kind of digital knowledge is important to make them, I guess, future ready for governance, right? But as we wrap up, Ryan, it's been a pleasure to host you today. But what advice would you give to entrepreneurs and leaders that are striving to implement digital strategies in their operations or in collaboration with the public sector?
Right. A couple of key things. I think number one is really this notion again of realizing that this is not a technology challenge. It's a culture challenge. And a lot of the work that we do, I actually describe it as digital culture change. And so I think often we kind of want to jump to, the shiny object of, here's the new system we're going to have in place. Here's the new website. Here's the new app. But we have to actually take that step back and understand the landscape the clients are dealing with. And I think particularly for anybody, who's listening, who's in the business side, who wants to work with government, I think that notion of empathy on both sides, of kind of understanding, the situation that those in government are in is very important to understand how to be a good partner on this. Because sometimes we view government as just being slow. But as they say, sometimes that's a feature, not a bug, right? Sometimes, public sector organizations are designed to move slowly on purpose. They have legislative and policy requirements to meet that the private sector doesn't. And ultimately, they have to serve everybody. And so it becomes really important to kind of understand that they are coming at this from a different perspective. But I think that partnership, when we can get the public and private sector to understand each other better, is where ultimately we're going to get better outcomes for Canadians.
Absolutely. And Ryan, thank you so much for such a stimulating conversation and your profound insights on this particular topic. I'm sure that our audience would find, great perspectives on how to deal with these digital complexities of this digital government and how to just deal with the public sector a bit better. So thank you for your time.
Thanks so much. Thanks so much for having me.
And that was the end of our discussion with Ryan Androsoff, to whom we'd like to extend our thanks, as well as to our partners, exclusive banking partner RBC, shipping partner UPS, exclusive accounting software partner Xero, and email partner Constant Contact for their support in making this podcast possible.